So, like they said, I've been with Power since July. I came over from a company whose name I can't tell you, but they mostly sell cars and a little bit of solar on the side. So I think you can probably guess. I'm a full-time special operations firefighter paramedic. That's why we're doing Monday, because my schedule is a little crazy. And actually, I got into solar originally as a customer. So I have a system on my house with whole home battery backup. Long story short, uh, I was shopping for the batteries specifically. We're on the Gulf Coast of Florida, near Tampa. It's not often, but we do get hurricanes. We do get storms like that. And anything like that happens anywhere in Florida, my team is deployed. So I needed my house to work no matter what with my family here. Couldn't rely on generators. We don't have gas, so it would have been propane. And as you guys in Texas proved last year, gas isn't as reliable as we thought anyways. Last month, like I said, I made the top 20 for consultants. That was quite the surprise when they called to interview me. One of their questions was, how did it feel when you found out? And my answer was, well, you're the one who just told me, because I had no idea. But like you said, I put batteries on almost all my pitches. With some of the mentor deals, it's not as cut and dry, but my personal deals, just because I'm dealing a lot with first responders and military people, we almost all of them end up closing with batteries, which is pretty awesome. So why batteries? For me personally, like I mentioned, energy security was my number one driving factor, even going solar. For me, I wanted the batteries, and the solar was what I needed to get there, to charge the batteries when the grid goes down. That's very common, especially, you get certain populations. I mentioned first responders, I mentioned military, people who live in areas that are storm prone, people who have areas where the grid is not reliable. You go out west, maybe you don't get storms, but you get earthquakes or you get fires, whatever it is. If you've had a history of your grid going down, or you have a distrust of the grid, energy security is a huge driving factor. I would say even one of the strongest driving factors, to the point where most of these systems, people are not saving money. Best case scenario, they're breaking even. Sometimes they're even paying more than their electric bill was. But what they're buying is security. And in their minds, in my mind, that's priceless. Second customer type you might find is people who are looking for cost savings. And depending on your utilities, I know you guys in Texas are absolutely nuts. I can't wrap my head around your utilities. But here in Florida, our major utilities are all 1-for-1 net metering. So batteries are a money losing proposition with them. We get some of the little co-ops, and you almost need a battery when they're doing time of use rates. So if you have those near you, putting in one battery, being able to shave and change your peak consumption hours to off peak times, you could actually eke some savings out. So batteries versus generators, one of the biggest questions that we get out there. It's no surprise generators, and we're talking standby generators, are cheaper, a lot cheaper for the most part. But batteries have no moving parts, or our Enphase batteries, I should say, have no moving parts. The SolarEdge, I believe, has a cooling fan in it, but we're talking one moving part. Generators, it's a gas engine. It's just like a car. You've got hundreds, if not thousands, of moving parts. Batteries have no maintenance. They have no fuel, no oil changes, nothing like that. If it's sized properly, as long as the sun comes back out, you can refuel it, if you will, almost infinitely. There's no worry about running out of fuel. The sun's going to come out, and if it doesn't, we've got bigger problems. And one of the biggest things, especially for people in strict HOA neighborhoods, batteries are silent. There's no loud generator buzz going all night. By comparison, generators can work great if on a gas line, apparently, unless it snows in Texas. You get relatively unlimited fuel as long as that gas line remains operational. If you don't have a gas line at your house, that's when we start getting issues. You have to bury a propane tank, and that's finite. Our average ones here, they work great for 3 days after a hurricane. Now you're out of propane, what do? You're not getting refilled 3 days after a hurricane, I promise. Combustion engines, like I mentioned, they're just like your car motor. They're just running off propane or gas or diesel instead. They require maintenance. They need to run. How would your car run if you only expected it to work once a year? So you need to have it run every month, and that uses up your fuel if you're on propane. You wear out parts, you need oil changes, you need stuff like that. There's a lot more points that can fail, and they're often very noisy. So certain HOAs will have limitations on them. Either that you have to go with very expensive ones with some fancy mufflers and noise abatement. Sometimes you have to have buried propane tanks, which gets expensive, limits your fuel, things like that don't affect the batteries. So there's pros and cons. As far as what storage solutions Power offers, the one that we've been offering for quite a while now is the Enphase battery. This is a picture of an Enphase 20, so two different 10 kilowatt hour batteries, as well as their control box here in the middle, mounted on the outside of the house. I put this picture in here because it shows these batteries are fully sealed units. There's no moving parts. There's no need for ventilation. Everything's radiant cooling. We can have this on the outside of a house here in Florida. Probably wouldn't want it in direct sun, but as long as it's not in direct sun, it can get rained on. It can have the wind blow on it. It can do whatever. It's going to be just fine. It's rated for it. The Enphase battery is an AC battery. What that means is that it receives power in AC and it discharges power in AC. There's an advantage to that. It has its own inverter. Unlike the next one, the SolarEdge that I'm going to get to, it doesn't rely on the system's inverter. So your panels on the roof have Enphase inverters. Power is converted from DC to AC, comes down to the battery, goes through another Enphase inverter, converts back to DC for storage. Now you go to use it, it has its own inverters. The perk of that is during the day, your solar's producing, and we'll go best case scenario. You've got a really, really sunny day. Your solar's maxed out. Your inverters on your roof are maxed out. If you for some reason needed power from your battery too, you have separate inverters on your battery, which are able to contribute to your real-time power output. That's huge because that's when you're handling peaks. And when you're on a battery system, if you get a peak charge or a peak load required that you can't fulfill, your system goes unstable and shuts down. The Enphase batteries come in 3 and 10 kilowatt increments. I would have to check with Power on this, but I believe the 3s are only to be used with the IQ8s. You wouldn't want to use it with the 7 anyways, but the 10s are what we've been offering for a while. The 10s are actually made up of it's actually 3.36 kilowatt hour subunits. So, each 10 has 3 of them inside it. The chemistry of these batteries is lithium iron phosphate. Don't want to bore you with the details, but that has an advantage. Cars use lithium cobalt. We don't have any cobalt in here. So aside from the ethics of cobalt mining and all that stuff, iron phosphate batteries are cheaper, they last longer, and they're much, much, much more stable. This is where I'm getting into putting my firefighter hazmat tech hat on. I've fought Tesla car fires. It is fun, but you don't want that in your house. The iron phosphate batteries don't require any active cooling. So you have no fans. They don't have a chance of runaway thermal reaction, which is what causes those car fires when they discharge too quick or they charge too quick and they overheat. And when they start to fail, they start failing faster, which makes them fail faster, which makes them fail faster, and so on. That doesn't happen with this chemistry. And also, they last 4 times longer. So 4 times as many charge-discharge cycles. So cheaper, safer, and longer lasting. There's got to be a downside, and there is, and that's that you have lower energy density. So you saw from the picture that I had, they're a little bit bulky, especially compared to the SolarEdge battery I'll show you in a little bit. And that's why they're not really used in cars as much right now. Tesla's starting to, just because in a car, you need as much electricity storage as possible in as small of a package as possible. Like I mentioned, they're fully sealed. You can put them inside, you can put them outside. If you have the ability to put them inside, never a bad idea, right? Why wouldn't you want to be overly careful? But they can go outside and they're rated as such and warranted as such. And then the last big, I can't emphasize how big this is. They are field serviceable. So for comparison, if you had a Tesla Powerwall and there's a problem with it, let's just say with the inverter, you have to first get Tesla on the phone. So have fun. Then you have to schedule them to come out. Also have fun. They have to take the battery off your wall and ship it to their battery factory in Nevada. They're going to check it out there, fix it, replace it, whatever it is, ship it back to Tesla locally. And then you have to make another appointment and they're going to have to come out and reinstall it. I'm not even going to guess how long that's going to take. These Enphase batteries are largely field serviceable. And you can see why in this picture here. So I mentioned this whole unit here is an Enphase 10. You can see this is with the cover off. You can see it's 3 separate 3.36 kilowatt hour subunits. And each one of those has 4 Enphase microinverters in it. So, pick what's going to fail. Is it a microinverter? Okay. You lose your inverter on a battery that has 1, you lost your whole battery. Here you've got 12. You lose 1, you've still got 11 twelfths of your power output. Um, and just like the microinverters on your roof, if that goes bad, they come out, take the case off, pop that off, put the new one on, you're good to go. Let's say it's something worse. Let's say part of this right subunit's battery cell fails. All right, well, they come out, take this thing off. It's the size of about 2 shoe boxes. It's not particularly heavy. Take that off, put a new one on. It's a lot easier than taking this whole thing down. Not to mention, if it fails when you need it, you've still got 2/3 of your power. So they're just like we always preach with the microinverters on the roof. There's no single point of failure with these batteries. It's all about redundancy. And if we're talking people who are interested in energy security, redundancy, extreme levels of redundancy are exactly what we're looking for. So that's a huge selling point for them. Second battery we just started carrying, and by just started, I mean like a week or two ago, is the SolarEdge Energy Bank. It's this on the left here. You got the inverter right next to it, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen these in person. So just to give you an idea, this is a 10 kilowatt hour battery. It's a sleeker, thinner design, more like the Tesla Powerwall because it's the same chemistry. You get more power in a smaller, compact unit here. It's a DC battery. So there's pros and cons here, like I mentioned with the AC battery. DC is going to be more efficient. You produce power on the roof in DC, and I'm going to go back to this picture. So it's coming down here to this inverter in DC. If it's going to the battery, it passes straight through, goes straight into the battery, still as DC, no conversion. When you need it, it gets converted. It comes back to the inverter, gets converted to AC. So you have one conversion rather than 3. Less power is lost. That's a big thing, especially if we're talking an outage where your production's not what you'd like it to be. You have a storm and it's still cloudy out or something like that. These come in 10 and 20 kilowatt hour sizes. The 20 is just 2 of the 10s, just like with the Enphase. And they must be paired with a SolarEdge Energy Hub inverter, of which we currently only have the 7600s. Now, if you're doing a large system, like a lot of these that are batteries, we're talking a 20, 25 kilowatt solar system, you're obviously going to have multiple of these. And I'm still waiting on clarification from Power. And it should be that this is 20 per 7600 inverter, but the system on Solo won't let you put, let's say we had 3 inverters, it won't let you put 60, which would be 2 per, which is what it should be. So we're working on that, waiting on clarification there. I mentioned chemistry. This has cobalt in it, same as the EVs. It's more dense. It is technically not as safe. If you remember, I think it was a year or 2 ago, LG batteries, which were the same chemistry, had a bunch of fires. Not saying that's likely, just saying that with the Enphase, it's less likely, or more unlikely, I would even go and say. We're talking probably less than 1%, probably less than 1/100% here, and probably less than 1,000% risk over there. Advantage here is you've got a large inverter. You've got one large 7600 watt inverter compared to 12 microinverters. So the Enphase battery can put out about 3,800 watts in real-time power output. This can theoretically put out 7,600. So, that comes in handy if you're dealing with appliances that have peak charges. We're talking anything with a compressor, anything with a motor, well pumps, refrigerators, air conditioners, whether they're central or room units. Anything that is using a compressor is going to have a really short-lived peak where it's going to demand a whole lot of power just to start, and then once it gets going, it sustains a lower level. If you exceed the maximum power output of the battery, in the case of the Enphase 3800, it's off. It'll restart, but it's off. It's going to crash. So you can theoretically start a larger appliance here with the SolarEdge one. Now remember, you're still 10 kilowatt hours. So if you're sustaining higher levels of power output, you're going to drain that battery quickly. And I mentioned the higher efficiency because you only have one conversion. So I see 2 chats. Let's take a look at those real quick. Okay. So how can you use batteries? I made the comparison earlier to a generator. It's very, very similar. This can be in place of or actually supplementing a whole home generator. You can do whole home, you can do critical load backups. My suggestion here, even if you're doing a planned whole home backup, have the engineers install a sub panel, because that allows you to shed loads that are not priorities. Just for an example, if you have, I don't even know, my house, I have a hot tub, right? And if we get a big hurricane, the last thing I want draining my battery is that hot tub, because I guarantee you I'm not going to be in it. I'm going to be working. So I wouldn't want that backed up and draining that. If I had it hooked up to the whole home, I have to be home and physically present to go and flip that breaker and turn it off. If I have it on the sub panel, I could just not back that up if it's not a priority. Also, we'll get to it later. Enphase has just rolled out some smart breakers, and we'll cover that, where you can do it through the app. What you can back up is determined by that real-time power output, which we just talked about. Larger loads, regardless of which brand we're talking, you need more batteries. The Enphase, the SolarEdge, they're additive. So 2 Enphase, you're talking 7,600 peak output. 2 SolarEdge, you're talking 15,000 roughly. The difference is the SolarEdge, it's using that central inverter. So your 7,600 peak for 2 batteries is the same no matter if you have sunlight or not, because your inverter is maxed out. And that's the same inverter that's controlling your PV. For Enphase, you're 7,600 now, but you still have whatever is being produced on the roof, because that's separate inverter. So you're still able to add that power in. So the SolarEdge, I would say probably you get a higher peak per amount of battery space during no light conditions, but the Enphase, you get more power output during light conditions, if that makes sense. So you got to figure out what the outages by you look like. Are they storms with a lot of clouds for a long period of time? Are they hurricanes like we get, where you have one bad day and then it pulls all the weather with it? It's blue skies, sunny, but the grid is just torn apart. Or are you out west where there's no storm whatsoever? They just shut down the grid because they don't want you to start a fire. You gotta take a look at your customer's individual needs. And then obviously the length of the backup duration has a whole bunch of factors that impact it. Battery size being the most obvious. The more you store, the longer it lasts, just like the battery in anything you've ever owned. The PV size. So if you oversize the PV, you're going to be able to recharge the battery quicker. You're going to be able to handle the direct needs of the house during light conditions without taxing the battery. And you produce more power during suboptimal conditions. So you're able to reduce the strain and increase your recharging. I like to go for about 115 because that's the max most Florida utilities will allow. And then be careful. We're running into this issue right now to the extent that one of our building inspectors is on the verge of having his bank account subpoenaed. There's some very outdated inspectors, AHJs, people who refuse to look at the true capabilities of these systems. They refuse to listen to the manufacturers, the engineers, and in our case, he's treating it like a generator. So know your AHJ, know your area, and set realistic goals with your customers. Let's see what these, see a couple more questions here. You mentioned the lifespan on the Enphase battery due to chemistry belonging to SolarEdge. Real world life expectancy. So they're both warranted for 10 years from the manufacturer. By longer life expectancy, I'm referring more to charge discharge cycles than timing. So their warranty is going to be for 70% of original output. The Enphase will last 4 times as many charge discharges until that, at least in lab conditions. Real world, I would expect them to have a usable life, both of about 14 years. Heavy use, the Enphase longer than the SolarEdge. Let's see, I know it's dependent on size, but can you run the AC with only 2 end charge? Yes, that depends on the size. Sometimes you need to install what's called a soft start for the AC. Basically, just look at what is the peak draw of the AC unit and the peak power output of the end charges. So 2 of them being 7,600 in worst case conditions, middle of the night. And then also you have to factor in what else is running, because it's the sum of everything. Comments on net metering and batteries. So if you have a utility that has time of use rates, so where you're paying more during peak times and less during off-peak times, you can use the batteries and you can actually program in those hours, and they'll do everything they can to make sure that you're pulling power from the grid during the off-peak times instead of during the peak times. Comes in handy for EV car charging if you have to charge it during the day. Comes in handy for AC, stuff like that. Basically, what you're essentially doing is shifting your peak demand to off-peak times to save you some money that way. One Enphase will charge essentials if there's no sun for a few days. Yeah, fridge, Wi-Fi, some lights. Yeah, you could probably get a few days from that. You know, you'd want to coach them to keep an eye on the app. You know, realistically, you're never going to have truly no sun for a few days in a row. If you do, we've got some bigger issues, but keep an eye on the app, you know, swap out their light bulbs for LEDs, things like that. Fridge is your biggest one that you mentioned there. On that note, I always make all my customers promise to hide their wives' hair dryers, toasters, things like that. Uh, Anything that turns a wire red, inductive heating is your worst enemy for this. If it turns a wire red, it's just drinking electricity. If you're on a battery backup, that is one of the worst things you can run. IQ8, I believe I have that later in here, so I'm going to hold off. If I don't, hold me to it and ask me again. The commission, that depends on every region. It varies a little bit. There's a chart floating around out there. I believe, I want to say they're about, I know it just changed, but I believe they're about 4,000 each. And the SolarEdge is actually a little higher. I'll just put it this way: you make good money when you're selling batteries. As everybody found out about my income in December, I didn't know they were putting that in there. Solar Insure does not cover the batteries. That's the only thing that they exempt. But I'll talk about another option here in a little bit. All right, so moving on. My general rule of thumb, and this is not anything technical, this is not gospel, this is a starting point, a place to start the conversation and then verify. Count how many major loads you have, add one, and that's how many Enphase batteries you need. Major loads being anything I mentioned with a pump or a compressor. So air conditioners, well pumps, large chest freezers, things like that. You know, so if you do the 10 kilowatt hour battery, you're 120 volt outlets only. 20, you should be able to get one major load, 32, 43, and so on. Now, like the question with the air conditioner, I don't even know if this is a real thing, but if you had like a 7-ton AC or a commercial air conditioner, of course, you're not running that on a 20. But if you have a 3.5 ton, and it's fairly recent, the older they are, the more inefficient they are. But you have a fairly recent, good name brand, 3.5 ton, you're probably going to be fine with the 20. But always do your diligence. We have a battery checklist now that you're supposed to complete and upload to Assets, and it's supposed to automatically be generated with the Power Docs. I don't know if it always does or not. I do it manually. But that's something you go over with the homeowner. What are your priorities for backup? And even do it for whole home. You know, what are your main priorities? What would be the hardest thing to live without? For most people, refrigerator's number one because it costs a fortune to lose food. People who have longer outages here in Florida, my point of view is, what's the point in a backup if you can't have AC? Because your house is going to be unbearable in a couple of hours. You know, just a small story on that. For those of you who don't know Florida, we had maybe about 2 weeks of total COVID lockdown in the last 2 years, right at the beginning when no one really knew what was going on. At that time, that's when everybody with normal jobs was working from home. Also, that's when those of us with not normal jobs, fire department, we never basically got to come home. We were always working. So I'm at work and I see on our neighborhood Facebook page, everyone's complaining. Every single day in the afternoon, the entire grid is crashing. It's browning out. The grid was never designed for the number of houses there to be running with full occupancy during the afternoon during July and August or June or whatever it was. You know, because most people are at work or at school, whatever. So all that extra demand was exceeding what the grid could supply to that area. They were browning out. And people were on the neighborhood page complaining. You know, my house is 95 degrees. How are my kids supposed to be in this? Yada, yada, so on. I would call my wife, hey, how's the house? That's fine. Why? Oh, the power was supposed to be out, but our batteries, I can't tell you how many batteries I've sold in the neighborhood since then. You know, the power's out and people come by and see that our lights are on or they hear our AC kick on. You know, truly, when you know how to discuss them and you get your first couple, they sell themselves through word of mouth. It's incredible. But yeah, so like I said, this rule of thumb does not account for all the variables. You know, do your diligence. If you don't know what you're doing, consult your installer, pass things by them. They're going to have to do load calculations anyways for engineering, but this is a good place to get started. So I mentioned that Enphase has their smart breakers. It's called IQ Load Controller. The first generation of it came out. It controls 2 breakers, and you can run up to 2 of them on the battery controller. So you can control up to 4 breakers. It's got a bunch of different settings on it. It basically, the most common one is going to be state of charge. So let's say you do have a pool, and you want it to be able to run during the sunny days and stuff, because you don't want your pool turning green, getting nasty. But it's not a priority, right? It's not, you don't need it to be running necessarily overnight. So with state of charge, you have it set, and I'll make up a number where your battery gets down to 40%, it kills that load. So it stops draining it. When the sun comes out, you recharge, you get past 40%, it turns it back on. Another setting that it'll have is automatic off. So that would be something I would use, say, for this hot tub, where the second the grid goes down, it turns it off. And then through the app, you can go back in and manually turn it on if you want it to. But that way it's not sitting there draining without you wanting it to. There's generator settings where the breaker will only be on if you have a generator, and we'll talk about that in a second. But if the generator's running, you can run larger circuits, so you can have it set to run generators on. And there's a few others, very niche ones that are going to be coming out that I'm blanking on, but they're going to be over the air software updates later on. One note that I'm going to put on here: this is not automatically included in battery systems. So when you look at Enphase's marketing material, they talk about this like it's standard, like it's default. And this is part of the conversation I had with Spencer tonight. The way that they discuss the load controller and the way that they seem like it's integrated into the battery systems just makes it seem like it's part of it. It's additional. So we don't have a specific adder for it. It's something that you would have to talk to your installer, figure out what the cost is going to be, communicate through your PM. That's the most important thing here. Have good open lines of communication. If you're dealing with the same installers regularly, build a relationship with them. I promise you that will serve you well going forward. Have that dialogue, make sure they know that this is something that you want, if that's something that would pair well with your customers' needs. So we had questions, the 7s versus the 8s. So both of these work with batteries, obviously, because we had batteries when we had the 7s. They both allow the solar to remain online during the grid outage. That's something I've been hearing people talk about. The 7s definitely allowed you to remain online during the outage. That's not new to the 8s. They both allow you to charge the batteries with excess production. Also not new at all. The difference is the 7 had a limit on how much PV could stay online compared to the battery. And the reason for that was if you produce a whole ton of power from your PV and it's going to the battery, now you only have 12 inverters there. To convert it back to DC, you're going to overload those inverters. You're going to exceed their capacity. So it's roughly a 1.5 to 1 ratio. Anything extra is automatically shed when the grid goes down. They're wired together separately. So, just by that ratio, easy numbers. If you had a 10 battery, you couldn't really have more than 15 kilowatts of solar tied to it. And that's not exact. It depends which of the 7 inverters you used, but it's in that range. What's new to the 8s is that you don't have that shedding anymore. The 8 is able to update its real-time output quick enough based on the demand. So it's not going to overload the battery. It's going to give the battery whatever the battery can handle. It's going to give the house whatever the house is asking for. And anything else, it's going to shut down or taper down, I should say, the production at the panel level. So you're not going to be producing more than what you have a place to put it in. And that was the reason why panels are supposed to shut down when the grid goes down, because anything excess above your use, it needs somewhere to go. And the grid was your energy sink before. In this case, it's the batteries, but this is able to refine it. I think they say it's 1,000 times faster in it. Also, the 8 theoretically allows a sunlight only backup without any storage. We'll talk about that one more in a second. I'm very, very skeptical on that part. Do you present proposal without battery price first? Did you have that from the beginning? I don't present it before I do some research with the customer. I explore what they're looking for, their goals. A lot of times they want to see with and without, but before we even get to a presentation, before we even get to pricing, they usually know deep down that they're going to want batteries. So my job is to make the proposal with the batteries attractive and palatable. So back to the 8s. My suggestion, I mentioned that the sunlight only backup, I'm very skeptical about it. And my reasoning for that is, if you look at this consumption chart on the right, this is actually from my home system. This is my house's grid interaction throughout the day. So you can see, obviously, we all know this at night, pulling from the grid, bringing it back, and then at night reverse. But you can see throughout the day, there's these little spikes. These are probably from my air conditioner starting up, but they're exceeding my production for that day. That's why I'm pulling from the grid momentarily here. If we do sunlight only backup, every single one of these spikes, the system's crashing. And before you say, I know that that's my whole house, and you're not going to have your air conditioner on a sunlight only backup. But this, as you can tell by this upside down bell curve here, this was also a pretty good production day. If you do a sunlight only backup and you've got a bad production day, your AC kicking on, crash your whole system. And yes, it will restart, but is it good for appliances to be kicked on and off? Do you turn your computer on and off by plugging it in and unplugging it? It's not good for the computers, or it's not good for the electronics. Wouldn't be good for your house. I'm very skeptical about that. So I say put a minimum of the 3.36 kilowatt battery on there. The change in the price is minuscule. I think it's like 14 versus 10,000 here in Florida. I know it's different in each region. But you put that small battery, each of these little times that you exceed what you're producing, that battery can pick that up. Can't sustain it, but it can pick that up and prevent you from crashing, keep you online that time. Equip your systems with the load controller. That way, when you're having those bad production days, your battery's getting low, you can shut down those loads that are draining it. If your system's crashing and you don't know why, you can open it up and say, oh, okay, we're not making enough to power the AC. Shut that off until it gets sunnier. So that way, at least everything else works. And set realistic expectations, especially if we're trying to go the smallest system possible. We do an 8 with the 3.36. They're not powering more than their true essentials. Some outlets, a new Energy Star TV, Wi-Fi, refrigerator, and not an old one. You're not powering much more than that. You may not even be able to do the lights in every single room. So you're going to have to pick certain areas, and those are your priorities. And even in certain areas, if you're backing up the office, because that's where your Wi-Fi is, if you print something to a laser printer, you're probably going to crash the system. So set realistic expectations, educate your homeowners, let them know what they can and can't do. And, based on the conditions, and make sure that, the worst thing that can happen, I mentioned that batteries sell themselves through word of mouth. Well, the opposite can be the case too. If you promise the world and you under deliver, it's going to be the complete opposite. They're going to be telling everyone how bad you are, how much of a scam batteries are, and so on. You set good expectations, and maybe you even exceed them. Next thing you know, all their friends want to buy the system too. And then, so we talked about the load controller. Let's see a couple more chats here. Consumption meter without batteries. If you did the 8 backup, the sunlight only backup, you would probably, I think you would get that. I don't know for sure. And if you do a deal with Sonova, ironically, you do get consumption metering. They require it. And you could probably upgrade to getting consumption metering if the homeowner really wants it. I don't see why we don't always do it. I have it on my house because of the batteries. You can see this chart that I put in there. I think consumption metering is great because I can look at it, and last year we put Christmas lights up, and I never would have guessed how much power Christmas lights use, especially the old ones. So I knew this year that we were getting all LEDs because of it. And then, like you said, 8,000 sunlight, 10,000 with the battery. It's a no-brainer, especially if you finance this. What is $2,000 over 20, 25 years? So deal making tips. How do you sell batteries? Obviously, they're not cheap. They aren't for everyone, even though I like to think so. But figure out what weight the customer puts on energy security. What is their personality? What's their values? Do they lose power all the time? Is it a storm-prone area? I know somebody in the beginning said they're from the Panhandle. These things should be selling themselves like hotcakes in the Panhandle, because y'all just get slammed by every storm that the meteorologists tell us we're going to get hit by. It misses us and hits you every year, it seems like. It's a no-brainer. If a storm-prone area, somebody who you've got kids at home, you got your family at home, especially if you're in my situation where when it hits the fan and you have to be gone for work, like you're gone, especially when it's bad out. you can build that value. Do they have special backup needs? Do they need an air compressor, oxygen concentrator? I mean, do they need the refrigerator to keep drugs cold? I sold a battery one time to somebody who breeds coral, and apparently you can sell little golf ball sized pieces of coral for like $25,000. So he had all these aquariums with coral in it, and they could not die. So he spent $24,000 on a 20 kilowatt system to do nothing other than back up his aquariums. That's a special need. That's something you can pick up on when you're doing your research, small talking, getting to know the customer. That's the biggest thing. Feel it out, see what's valuable to them. Even people, if they got a saltwater fish tank, that can get expensive. Food in a fridge or freezer, that can get expensive. Are they hunters and they've got chest freezers full of whatever they flew out west to go get, and it's valuable to them, whether monetary or the value they place on it, they might not want to lose that. You need Wi-Fi to run your business. One of the most recent ones I did is somebody who homeschools. They did a partial home backup because they needed a fan, lights in the room that they do their homeschooling in, Wi-Fi, and the ability to plug in their Chromebooks. And they did a 10 kilowatt hour battery. It works perfectly for them. Pissed off kids. Yeah, that's the one perk of getting to go to work whenever things get bad. Obviously the majority of people do this finance. I'm not gonna say everyone. I did a 30 or 40 kilowatt hour system for somebody with a cash deal, LG panels and everything, and that's by far and away the exception. Almost everybody who does these, as you know, with solar too, it ends up being financed. And with batteries, you almost always go 20 or 25 years to make the palatable payments. I personally almost always go Sonova for batteries. If you're 20 or higher kilowatt hour system, I'm going Sonova, especially if you've got a 700 credit score. Smaller systems, sometimes we'll do Sunlight just because it's quicker and easier, especially people who want to pay it off faster. Cash is always an option, but I don't know many people who can fork over $100,000+ in cash. I wish one day I'll be there. But Sonova, they have a lot of very, very battery specific and battery friendly options. And I know a lot of people haven't had a good experience with them. I know they can be a true pain. I don't know if you've noticed, Solo never puts less than 3% shading. If you transfer that over to Sonova when you build the system there, and they come out and do the shade study and it's actually 2 or 1% shading, they will send an email directly to the customer with the subject line, all caps, change order signature required. And all the change order is, hey, you're going to make more power than we predicted. The end. But that scares people. So, maybe not the best bedside manner, so to speak, but they've got some of the best products for this. At least here in Florida, the exact programs vary by state, but this seems to be pretty universal. If you have a 700 FICO and nothing extreme, like a bankruptcy last year, but you somehow still have a 700, you get 25 years, 0% financing. 650, 25 years, 1.99. That 0% makes us have really nice monthly payments, even with big batteries. As of right now, they only support the Enphase battery. I talked to them earlier, today's Monday, so last week. They're going to be adding the SolarEdge, but it's probably going to take 2 to 3 months. You get an all or nothing approval for $150,000. So what that basically means is if you have a 650 credit score, you're approved for $150,000. If you have a 649 credit score, you're approved for $0. There is no gray area. They do have, price per watt caps and stuff like everyone else, and they're a little stricter than most, but it's nice because we build these battery systems and they can get pretty expensive for anyone who's looked at one. And, I've done it where you go and apply to Sunlight or you go to apply to Good Leap and you have the deal, you have the customer agreeing to the payment, you have the system, how they like it. And, let's say it's a $110,000 system and you go apply to Sunlight and they get approved for 100. Now, what do you do? At least here you can predict, if they get approved, what they're approved for. And I don't know anyone else who's going to approve $150,000 at 651 credit score. To get that with Sunlight, I think you have to be 740 and good debt to income, and it has to be a manual approval and so on. Good Leap, I think, only goes to 125. And then the biggest reason I go with Sonova for batteries is they give a 25-year bumper to bumper warranty. think Solar Insure. You don't need to put Solar Insure on it because this 25 years instead of 30, but it includes the battery. So every 10 kilowatt hour battery, 2350 from that goes into essentially a trust fund to cover the cost of the replacement. If you don't add 2350 to the cost of your battery when you put it in there, it will be deducted from your margin. So make sure to do that. But, if we're talking, the question earlier was how long these last. They're warranted for 10 years. If at year 11, because you used it heavily, your storage drops from 70 to 69%, you get it replaced. If at year 24 out of 25, your storage drops to 69%, you get it replaced. And it's replaced with whatever it will be equal or better. Because, in 24 years, they're not getting batteries from now. And the thought and how Sunnova can do this is because the thought is the price is always going to be going down. But it's a good insurance policy because we know batteries. Everybody has had something with a lithium battery. Your phone in 3 years does not hold the charge it did the day you bought it. And then replacing Solar Insure on a large system, that is a pretty good chunk of change, and that helps with that monthly payment, make it look a lot better. We're talking these big expensive systems. Maybe they're not having savings, but the closer we can get to what they're already paying, or even beating it, the better we're going to be. And then Sunnova also does not report the loan to your credit as a loan. So you'll see the credit check, but it won't impact your DTI as long as you stay in good standing. Now you start missing payments, you go to delinquent. They obviously reserve the right to report it and the report when you go delinquent and all that. But the thought here is, you don't get dinged on your credit for paying your electric bill. Why should you get dinged for this, which is replacing your electric bill? So that's a nice thing, because who wants to go buy a car and have to explain what the $130,000 loan is on their house? Let's see, more questions. Would I choose a 3 over a 10? Absolutely not. I will always choose to have more backup duration. The 10 has more power, so it can back up larger things in theory. Also, with the 3, you have 1 day of bad production, you're done. 10, if you're careful, you buy little time until the sun comes back out and you can recharge. So 3, I would 100% do as the minimum. I will never, ever do a sunlight only unless they already have a standby generator. But the 10, that gives you a little bit of time, especially if you're careful. Sunnova roof warranty is only 10 years. Solar insurance is 30, sure, but the Sunnova actually covers the damage caused by the leak. A lot of people don't know that. Solar Insure will fix the leak, but any damage it causes, they don't pay. And also, what you got to bear in mind with these leaks, we're not talking roof degradation. We're talking leaks that are caused by installation. You're going to know that the first rainy season. So, if you're installing in Death Valley, maybe it takes you 30 years to get a rainstorm. If you're installing here, chances are that the installers got chased off by a rainstorm if you got installed in the summer. So you'll know if there's a leak within 10 years. But yeah, I mean, it is something to explain. It's a trade-off, but I'd rather have them cover the damage than 20 more years when, if it hasn't leaked in 10 years, I'm not particularly concerned about it because the leaks are usually from a bad installation. They're not really from it degrading. Use caution when you're doing Sunnova. It is a very manual process. I know they're trying to integrate it into Solo. From everything I've seen, that's been a disaster. It was a disaster last time they tried it. It's not working very well right now. The only thing I use it for is to import my design into the Sunnova website and finish it over there. But it's very manual. You go and you click and let's just say you're trying to do the Q-Cell 350 for your panel. You click on Q-Cell for panel on Sunnova and you scroll through and there's, 150 different panels. There's probably 20 different 350s. If you don't know the exact panel that you're trying to install, you're going to mess it up. If you don't know the monitor, you're going to mess it up. It's a little better now if the integration works well enough to move it over, which it sometimes does and sometimes doesn't. But I don't trust the integration. Like I said, I don't do any of the deal through the integration other than transferring the system. Maybe and hopefully it does get better. But I haven't seen anything to indicate that that's coming anytime soon. I cannot highly recommend enough working with an experienced Sunnova mentor because of this. You mess this stuff up, it's egg on your face. It's potentially money out of your pocket. It's frustrated customers who cancel. It's change orders. It's long email changes, delays in process, and so on. The list goes on and on. I think there's an old saying, don't miss a quarter chasing a penny. If you haven't used Sonova before, even if you are an expert in solar, find somebody who's done Sonova and just walk through a deal or two with them first. I promise it will pay you off better in the long run. Yes, they do support the Rec 400. So any questions? Take down my information here. With my job, it's hit or miss calling me. So the best thing to do is text or email. I'll text, call you back, whatever's necessary. If you ever want to if you need a mentor outside of California and whatever other states need special licenses, always happy to work with you. If you're in those states, happy to work with you unofficially. But like they said in the beginning, I specialize in batteries, specialize in backup and Sonova. So certified with both Enphase and SolarEdge. I don't like to pick favorites. I will truly design the system that's best for each specific customer, and it's not always the same. I use both brands. But yeah, anybody have any more questions?
Hey, Mike, it's Joel, man.
Hey,
amazing training, brother. Appreciate you, all the knowledge. So I'm a little gun shy, man, with Sonova, because I've had 2 battery deals with them, and they've taken a long time, and beginning, middle, and end. So obviously you work with them a lot. Is there anything that you're doing differently? Because support and trying to get a hold of Ken and stuff a lot of times is real difficult. So anything that you can.
Yeah. So the first thing is, if everything goes smoothly and everything's in there right, that avoids the first delay of having to fix something. And I'm in your shoes. I was on vacation trying to call Ken on a Friday at like 8 p.m. trying to fix something before. Props to that guy for answering questions and answering phone calls at weird times. I have no idea what state he's based in. But yeah, getting things in, accurately to start with is going to be your first thing. Having local installers who are experienced and used to using Sonova also helps big time. Sonova has some weird quirks. For example, the Enphase batteries, you can pretty much mount them anywhere, but Sonova says they have to be 6 inches from the ground. And we had a system where they were installed where this installer had always put them, and the county approved it and everything right on the ground, or about 3 inches off the ground. And Sonova said no, they had to come back out and move them up 3 inches. And obviously that was a delay. But as that, I use the same installer here in the Tampa area for all of my deals. They're actually the only one I trust right now, but especially my battery deals. And, they went from, I talked to the owner of this company directly quite frequently. They went from being very, very skeptical about Sonova because the delays not only impact us getting paid, but it impacts them getting paid. And us getting paid is not having money that we want to have. Them getting paid is they put all of these hours and labor, and they paid their guys, and they bought whatever equipment. They're not getting paid anything for that equipment until they get paid. So they don't like that either. But as they have done more and more deals, they've learned how Sonova works. They've gotten more fluid with them. Another thing is, if your installer doesn't have a drone, you should have one if you can be out there at the install, because Sonova wants pictures of the roof, the installation, more so than Sunlight and GoodLeap do. So, long story short is just do your best being accurate with the project and try to build rapport with your installers and get them on board, get them experience, and ask questions, why are things being delayed, so that way you can improve them for the future.
Yeah. And then if I could do a part B to that, and you don't have to answer it right now, I can email you about it, but is there certain guidelines after the battery or the system has been installed where ahead of time the expectation of Sonova of what they need? You kind of touched on it a little bit, but
so yeah, what I'm referring to here is very, very engineering specific, and it's something. So let me back up a little bit. So when I present Sonova to customers, I make the analogy that Sunlight and GoodLeap are like a used car loan. You go to your bank, they look at your credit, based on your credit, they approve you for X amount of dollars. Sonova is more like a new construction loan. They've got progress payments. They're actually involved throughout the process. When engineering comes back, it goes to Sonova to review, not just to you and the customer. They're involved, they're hands-on the entire time. They like to consider themselves a solar company, not a bank. So do I know the specific guidelines or where you could get them? No, because it's going to vary by area. Usually things will get identified when they review the engineering. But another thing that comes to mind is that, and I don't know how this could have been identified ahead of time, but we had to go back out and change out a breaker one time because they require what's called a strap down breaker. And nobody knew that until after we were installed it. We submitted the pictures and they said, wait a minute, there needs to be a strap down breaker there, or a tie down breaker. I'm sorry. It's the code doesn't require that. They have requirements above and beyond code. I'm sure you could probably reach out, the installer reach out and see what their requirements are geographically specific, but there's too many variables that, I could probably answer for Hillsborough County, Florida, and that's about it.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. I was just trying to jump ahead of whatever I can do to help, man. Cause the couple that I have is, 5 months in and they're still sending them back, rejecting the thing. So,
what are they rejecting it for?
Yeah, it's, I'll email you about it. See if you can kind of dissect it. Thanks, man.
Yeah. Shoot me a text. Maybe we can touch base tomorrow. Anybody else? Anybody else had success selling batteries? Want them for their house now?
I mean, I'll keep asking, bro. Nobody's gonna ask. So when you're with the homeowner and you're obviously doing your discovery beforehand, and for us down here in Florida, we're kind of depending on where the tax credit lands, either a little bit above or a little bit below what they're currently paying. At that point, the money really isn't a factor, right? At that point, it's just peace of mind, what they're looking to do. And if they're kind of teetering between the decision, are you like, hey, listen, this isn't my house, it's your choice, but you guys should definitely get this? Like, where are you at with that?
I guess I'm not that upfront with it to that. I don't like to tell people what to do. I like to build them systems, give them options, and sure, I'll lead them. But the way that I usually handle something like that is, okay, you're already paying, I'm going to make up a number here, because you mentioned Florida rates. So if they're paying mid 200s or higher on their electric bill, most likely we're going to come in around a break even with batteries. Below that, it's going to be above. So I'll say, you're already paying $300 a month on average for electricity. You can keep paying the same thing you're paying now, and now it's essentially like you have a whole home backup. So you bought that peace of mind for free. And then on top of that, you have your average 19% Duke Tico FPL rate increase. And you're insulated from that now. So you're breaking even now, you're still going to save money down the road. And then for anybody here who's in the panhandle with your recent takeover of FPL for, what was that, Gulf Power?
Gulf Power, yeah.
Yeah, those people are going to be all about it. I was just reading about how people are having $500 electric bills up there now.
Nuts. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And do you find that people, when they're maybe in between getting a battery or not getting a battery, is that costing you to potentially close the deal right then and there? And they're like, what, give me some time to think about if I want to get a battery or not.
Not at all. Because I don't, I'm not a salesman. I'm not naturally a salesman. And big part of why I'm at Power is because the company I went to after the car company, they were trying to, just for example, we were selling a 4,000 square foot house, and the guy my boss tried telling me I should only put one Powerwall in their house and tell them it'll back up everything indefinitely. And I'm like, absolutely not. I don't like the lying, and I know a lot of you guys, all of you, I'm sure, don't either. That's why you're here, being your own boss. But I have no problem with the customer taking a day or two, because what I've found is when they take a day or two, when they sign, they're sure. If they sign right now, then you get customers sometimes who a day or two later, they're like, oh, but I thought of this question, or what about that, or whatnot. And if any of you have ever experienced a cancellation here, there's clawbacks. It's not a good thing. If you're a mentor and you get cancellations, they track that. It can count against you. So I like them to be very sure. The one thing that I do if they're on the fence is I'll say, hey, here, let's look at the app on my phone. I'll show you how many backups I've had. A lot of the people live very close to me that I'm selling these to because, like I said, it's all word of mouth. You get one, next thing you know, you've got 5. Next thing you know, you've got 20. And I'll show them. I'll open up my app, and I have 42 backups last I checked in the last year and a half. That's a lot. That's a lot of power outages. Now, the majority of them were surges and brownouts, sure, but I'll show it to them, and I put my money where my mouth is because I owned a system before I sold it to you. If I didn't believe that the value of it, we wouldn't be here. Now, there are people who don't see the value to the backup. They just want to save money, and that's fine. I don't push them. But I will guide them. I will give them my personal opinion, my experience. I'll share with them previous cases and stuff like that. But I haven't had any issues. I wouldn't say I've lost sales that should have been a solar only sale because I tried to get a battery on it.
Gotcha. And I'm sure that helps a lot, man. Just giving them the personal experience 100%.
Oh, yeah.
So I know you probably don't want to be known as the battery guy. So I'm gonna ask you a question as far as like your sales, because obviously you're doing well over there. What is the strategy on the homeowner that does want to take a couple of days to think about it, whether it's a battery or not, or just solar or whatnot? What's your approach? Do you say, hey, I'm going to call you in a couple of days, or how many days do you need? I'll call you back. Like what's generally something that you like to implement to make sure that you're scheduling that next time to meet so that you can go ahead and get the close?
Yeah. I mean, I keep in touch with them for sure. It's, I don't sit there. It feels like a sales tactic to me. And just something that I know if somebody tried it on me, that I'd be like, okay, you're getting a little pushy. And I know it works for most people. But I'm not like, okay, well, if I don't hear from you in 3 days, I'm going to call you. I don't say that to them. But if, for example, I had a consult on Thursday, and their objection was they don't like how they look typically, so they wanted to go and see. So I sent them some pictures. I got permission from somebody else to see the system, sent it to them, and then I'll touch base with them tomorrow if I haven't heard back yet. I give them the weekend. But no, I think the way that it usually goes, I'll have a good sense before I leave if they're interested at all, if they're interested in the battery specifically, or if it's kind of a dud and they're just being polite and getting me to leave. And the people who are interested, they'll usually get back to you, or when you respond to them, they'll respond. There's a couple times where I've had people that are truly on the fence, and then when we get one of these, like when we got the Christmas sale, I sent him the flyer of that, and suddenly that made him ready to jump on it. Those are certainly exceptions, but I'm very much an improviser. I'm not a planner. I don't have a script. I don't follow the same thing every time. I just kind of feel it out based on how that customer is. So
cool.
Probably
Thanks,
not
brother.
a good answer. It doesn't give you a playbook, but
no, it does, man. That's great. You customize it to the homeowner, and you go with what feels right, man. Cool. Appreciate you.
And when you do that, it builds a trust that makes them come back to you over a competitor sometimes.
Thanks.
Let's see the chat. Yes, Francisco, you are selling it on Wednesday. Absolutely.
Hey, I just want to share a little bit. I joined Power back in September. I closed my second sale ever in solar with Mike. I'm in Melbourne, Florida, and we're already planning on taking over Central Florida, the whole state here. And this Wednesday, we got two scheduled proposal with homeowners. Reach out to him, guys. He's got a lot of questions. You get what you see with him. It's for real.
I appreciate it. We're going 2 for 2 Wednesday.
Yeah. Yes.
Yep.
Hey, Mike,
Right.
I got a question. A question, bro. So you mentioned co-ops. I'm in an area where we have a lot of co-ops.
Okay.
I've sold a few battery deals. It wasn't actually in a co-op area, but some of the tactics that I have learned from really another solar company, I haven't really spoke with anybody until asking you now. What are your tactics in adding batteries to co-ops, and how you mentioned that it helps basically with the cost.
Let me ask, what state are you in?
I'm in Texas, man. We're full
Okay.
of cost.
Yeah. So, first thing I'll say, I'll be honest, I don't know if your co-ops work the same as ours. In Florida, our investor-owned utilities fall under a very strict set of state laws that were passed by a voter referendum a few years ago, and that FPL is currently bribing the assembly to try and change. The co-ops are exempt from that. So here, when I say co-op, it's co-op and the municipals, and they're basically allowed to set more or less whatever net metering arrangement they want to. They're not bound by that state law. So what we find for a lot of them is that what they'll do is force you onto a time of use rate, or they heavily discount the buyback rate, and they do it on a monthly basis rather than a rollover. So if you have Tampa Electric, which is one of the investors, for example, and you produce extra power and you export it, you get credit for a kilowatt hour that you can then use later. With the co-ops, you might get 3 cents added to your account instead of a kilowatt hour. And then when you buy it back, it's going to be 14 cents. So we'll look at with that, doing the battery. So that way, instead of sending that power back at a heavily discounted rate, you're hanging on to it, using it directly. You put a kilowatt hour in your battery, ignoring the little bit of loss you get in transfer, you get a kilowatt hour back. Does it necessarily make it where they're going to save money doing it that way? If they have a very high bill, it could. But really what that's doing instead is, you're already interested in something, but this is helping to justify the cost of the battery. Not only are you now getting a backup, but you're getting a backup that's going to help towards your electric. It's going to help make your production minimize what your electric bill is going to be. Yes, you are paying more for your solar system, but instead of having, doing 100% offset and still having a $50 electric bill every month, now you have 100% offset and you have a $20 or something like that. Taking little chunks out here and there, if that makes sense.
So what basically I've done on some systems, because some of these co-ops, there's some of them that are 1-for-1, but they don't roll over.
Mm-hmm.
And in those instances, if customers there's not really a reason to do 100% offset if they're overproducing, like 6 months out of the year, 5. What I've done is I've lowered the offset some and then added batteries to the system where they're pulling from the battery, say at nighttime and things like that, where they're not getting those delivery charges.
Yep. Yeah. So here we don't have delivery charges. We just get charged per kilowatt hour and then fuel surcharges and things like that. But yeah, I mean, it's a case by case basis. There's some co-ops where they make no sense. And then, anybody who's here in Florida, if you have Peach River, for example, it's damn near impossible to make a deal financially viable without batteries. It's about the only way that doing solar makes sense. And that's kind of by design on their part.
Got you. Yeah. The 1-to-1 co-ops I can work with batteries, but I'm dealing with one right now that it's like they sell their kilowatts at like 12 cents and they only buy back at 4 cents. So
those are the ones I put the batteries on. Those are the ones where the batteries make even more sense, because you're minimizing what you're selling back and then minimizing what you're purchasing. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I've been doing with co-ops, is trying to add batteries and explaining that. And that's what I'm working with my team on understanding. And I just want to see if there's anything you had to throw in there that would help me out.
Assuming that it's the same there, Solo, with anything that's not a standard 1-to-1, Solo here is awful at predicting what their bill is going to be afterwards.
They're horrible here too.
Yeah, basically any co-op, it pops up as like, your bill used to be $200. Now we have a $150 solar system, and your bill's still going to be.
That's exactly what.
If you have Sonova access, even if you don't sell it through Sonova, I still build it on there because their system's much more sophisticated with it, and it gets a much more accurate prediction.
Okay, well, I need to work on Sonova then. That's something I'm not familiar with, so that could be very helpful out here.
Yeah, hit me up if you want to go through some of those. Let's see,
I would love to, man.
Yeah, absolutely. 1 10 kilowatt hour battery during a backup. With IQ8s, your power during the day is going to be whatever your real-time daily production is. So that depends on the size of the PV. If you have a 11.76 kilowatt system. That's a 10 kilowatt AC. We're going to assume perfect conditions. You might be producing 10 kilowatts from that, plus the 3.8 that your battery is able to put out. So the value of it is very regional. Here in Florida, there's not a ton of value outside those specific instances that I laid out, the homeschooling, the aquariums, something like that. What I basically describe a 10 is able to do is the same thing that a very large portable generator. So, the biggest portable generator you can buy at Harbor Freight. What it can do is basically what the 10 can do. The value here comes with the fact that it's automatic. It doesn't require any fuel. You don't have to stockpile gasoline. You don't have to worry about going to find gas. It's instant. It's 3/1000ths of a second to take over. But yeah, I mean, if you're in an area that's very hot, very humid during the times that you typically have your outages, or vice versa, very cold and you have electric heat, the 10's not going to be a great solution. I would definitely go bigger. Usually the smallest that I sell is 20s. I'll go 20 to 40 usually. Answer the question. Perfect. All right, going once. Anybody else? Load control on Enphase. Yes. So we just started because they just finally made it available. Smaller systems, anything that you're trying, if you did a 10 kilowatt hour battery plus the IQ8s and you wanted to back up something larger, like let's say a chest freezer, load control would be very valuable, because that way you could back it up during the day, have it kill it at night, don't open it, stays frozen, back it up again the next day, and so on, without draining your battery overnight. I am starting to mention it now. It's a very manual thing. You have to make sure the PM knows that you want that. You'd have to know what it's going to cost from your local installer, add that as a miscellaneous electrical, or add it to the margin, whatever you want to do. But yeah, it's a super cool feature. I'm glad that it's finally out throughout the course of the year. So I said that they can do 2 breakers right now. The next one that comes out can do 4, and then there's going to be one that can do 6. So they're getting there. Anybody else? All right, can't believe that was an hour and a half almost. Power, including a soft start. They're not including it. Most of the installers can get them. So if it's something that's needed, that would be a miscellaneous electrical ladder. I've had installers put them in, or you can have their AC guy do it. Margin for the batteries. It depends. So, typically if I'm doing solar only here, anywhere but the panhandle, because the panhandle goes higher for some reason. And I don't, unless they strike me as someone who's purely going for lowest bidder, or I know right off the bat they've got a dozen other quotes, or they're quoted by Tesla or something like that. I usually sell around a 0.8, 0.7, somewhere in that range. Batteries, based on circumstances, I might drop it to a 0.6. Really what I do is build it and tinker until I get a number that looks like something I would agree to, and go from there. As bad as it sounds, if their credit is worse and they only get the 1.99 on Sonova, sometimes they end up getting a better deal because the margin's lower, because it's the only way we can make it work. If you get the 0%, it's pretty easy to make a number that's palatable. Not all of them, but the vast majority. Anything bigger than a 10, it is 100% my go-to. I've only ever done two systems that are bigger than 10 through anything but Sonova. And they were because, we can get people in good leap at like a 640. Sonovas, you get approved for nothing with a 649 or lower. So there's some people who just absolutely batteries are all they're going for. They need them. That's what they want. And, we ended up, the one I'm referring to, we ended up doing a good leap 20-year, like 5.9% or something, to keep the franchise fee low, to be able to sneak that into a 50,000 approval and make it work. But just be flexible. It's definitely my first tier option, is my go-to. Makes the easiest sale by far, because you get the best price. and that the warranty is super valuable. All right, if nobody else, turn it back over to Eddie. Let's see, add batteries to an existing system. In theory, yes. In practice, no, not right now. So if you have an Enphase system that has IQ inverters, the battery is technically retrofittable, or vice versa. If you sell a system now without batteries, it is technically possible to add the batteries later. In practice, we don't do it, and there's very few companies that will, because they can't get them. We're in a very, very fortunate situation. We were Enphase's launch customer. We sell enough of them that we got priority from Enphase. Big shout out to Jonathan Budd for that one. You know, we get priority access to it. We're very fortunate to have the batteries in stock. Last I heard from Tesla, they can't even get their batteries in stock. They've got an 18 to 24 month backlog for Powerwall installations, and they make them themselves. So the fact that we can get these with no delays is pretty incredible. But that being said, the margin to do just a battery is pretty low. That companies who are able to get batteries right now in today's market are saving them for full solar systems, not for retrofits. But in the future, is it possible? Sure. You have to match it to the equipment. So, you know, you can't put a SolarEdge battery on an Enphase system. You can't put an Enphase battery on a SolarEdge system, and vice versa. But yeah, appreciate you guys. Appreciate the input or the invitation, and don't hesitate. Reach out. Anybody needs more info, has questions, needs a mentor for a deal for one of these, always available.
Dude, awesome. Thank you so much, Mike, for even coming on.
Absolutely.
So many nuggets. Dude, right on, man. Thank you. Maybe we'll just do another one in the future, Mike. You know,
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, man. I guess if nobody's gonna have any questions, let me see if I could unshare your. Can you unshare?
Yeah. I can try. There it is.
There we go. Cool. Awesome. I'm gonna stop the recording right